All right. Well, welcome to Dignities and Disasters. This is Robert MacNaughton here. This is the show where it's my intention to take some typically complex topics that people tend to have a lot of different perspectives and opinions about. And with the help of subject matter experts that I'm connected to unpack these topics and have a more sophisticated, nuanced conversation so that we can ideally transcend any of the typical either or approaches to conversation where we're attached to one way of how it's being and making the other side wrong, but getting into that more holistic of a both and perspective of where we can see all the different ways to look at things, or at least, have more access to how we can look at things and therefore have more facility and be more useful in these challenging times. So today I'm happy to be approaching the topic of healthcare, and I'm really excited to have my friend and my doctor, Dr. David Tusek of Cloud Medical in Boulder, Colorado, here with me today. David, how are you doing? How does it sound to dive into such a topic since this is your area of expertise?
Well, I'm doing great, and I'm very happy to be here with you. And I'm excited about riffing on this topic with you, together with you. So, yeah.
Rock and roll. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this for quite some time, so I'm grinning. So I'll take a minute just to give a brief overview, and then we'll weave in additional context as needed. But for those of you that don't know, Dr. David Tusek, you're a board certified family physician. You've had experience in the ER. You're a member of Academy of Sports Medicine, the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, and the Institute of Functional Medicine. And here in Colorado, you run a direct primary care practice called Cloud Medical, which I want to talk more about just the whole concept of primary care soon, and where you get to work with a whole span of different clients and patients, including Olympic athletes and all sorts of folks that we have in Colorado in an up close way. And I met you in the integral community, the philosopher Ken Wilber, and all the work that he did of bringing together amazing thinkers and teachers of different lineages and approaches and having a transcendent conversation around, okay, what matters most these days? And that's where you and I met, and we are aligned in those values. And you've supported my projects over the years of trying to foster an integral conversation and application and practices. And I've always appreciated, David, the way that, in some ways, I see you're an entrepreneur. You've started a lot of healthcare businesses over the years, but I think it's more appropriate to call you like a healthcare innovator, that I see you consistently tracking what's happening on the front lines of healthcare and what's emerging, taking your own shots at it, working with it, and pushing the edges. And I always look to you. I'm like, when I get confused about healthcare, I'm like, okay, yes, what you're focusing on, it seems to me, is like where we're headed. That gives me more optimism and more kind of like hope about where humanity is headed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I'm called first to just say how much I appreciate you, how much I appreciate you for your deeply obvious care for this community, for all that you've done, and how much I honor you for showing up in all of the different ways that you do. And I think this podcast is just another example of that. And so really deep bow to you for the way that you are bringing a greater capacity to have, in some cases, difficult conversations, and in all cases, the attempt to co-create something that we know is possible deep in our hearts, and we're just all trying to find the best way to manifest our vision. And I really see you as a leading light in our community in all of those aspects. So deep bow and bravo, and I'm again very happy to be here. In terms of
Thanks, David.
Yeah. Where do we even pick up the thread on healthcare? I guess, one way that we can enter into it is to sort of ask okay, so there are many ways that we can critique the system. We can look at it, we can pick it apart, we can complain about it. And my interest has always been to find really, really pragmatic, practical, actionable, solution-oriented applications to dealing with those things that just don't seem to be right, those things that maybe even seem to be insane and unethical about how the system is constructed. And to look at it from the point of view, like, I really love the Bruce Lee quote about, how do you create the best Kung Fu methodology? And he said something like, well, you look at all the schools that are out there and you take what's useful and good from each of them, you add what's missing and discard the rest. And so if we were to take an approach like that with our healthcare system, we might sort of step back and say, all right, well, what is it very precisely? Can we be intellectually honest and point a finger about all the things that are actually magical and miraculous about what we're doing in medicine, of which there are legion. There's so much to be grateful for. There's so much to be in awe of, the capacities that we have in terms of the way that modern conventional mainstream medicine provides care for people. And then there's definitely aspects that are missing. So what are those very precise elements that need to be added? And then what's the fluff that is actually doing more harm than good,
Exactly.
And so I think, especially talking to someone like you, I mean, and we hinted at this a little bit before we hit the record button, but I think the energy from which we endeavor and intend to design and build and create something new is so fundamental,
Yes.
so fundamental. And I think this is a big hurdle for us. Like, I struggle with this hugely, and I think so many of us do, because we're still in a world, we're still in a culture, we're embedded in a culture that has sort of these three dominant logic systems that are all locking horns and vying for power. And we all embody elements of them, and sometimes they conflict with one another within our own selves. And that's a problem that needs to somehow be at least acknowledged and ideally addressed and overcome. And just very briefly, those three things are basically in the spiral dynamics lexicon. We have this sort of, and by the way, they're all three fairly evenly split throughout the country and throughout the West in general. And one of those three is the sort of amber blue mean, which is the ethnocentric, very paternalistic approach to all of life. It's the center of gravity from which we operate, and which has many positive attributes, like a focus on community and philanthropy and family values. But it has this shadow component, which is that it tends to be xenophobic, too ethnocentric, sexist, and sometimes racist, and so on and
Us
so
versus
forth.
them.
And it's the us versus them. And that's, that's what that us versus them energetic state from which they operate actually is present in the other two just as much, right? So in the next one up, of course, you have the much more meritocratic orange mean, which is all about not saying so much that we're going to discount people because of race or gender, but it's a hyper meritocratic perspective of the world in which the us is actually me against them being the rest of the world. And so it's a very hyper individualistic perspective where we create the same kind of incoherence with respect to overcoming any kind of ability to get beyond that war mindset of us versus them. And then, of course, the postmodern, hyper progressive, really, really far left green meme is, on the one hand, espousing that everybody is included and your truth is the same as my truth, and we can all be kumbaya happy together, until it sort of is like a scorpion that stings itself with his own tail. Exactly. And says, well, as long as you adhere to this particular worldview, which is basically summarized by the social justice agenda, and if we have any kind of a perspective that doesn't adhere to that, you actually are canceled. And so it becomes us versus the unwoke. So you have us versus them in the conservative side. You have me against the world in the sort of meritocratic, corporate materialism side, and then you have us against the unwoke in the green postmodern side, and all of them have the same kind of taste and the expression, and building anything or creating or designing any enterprise, company, system, product, what have you, will retain that war mindset unless we're very, very careful. And what's super exciting about our community is that we are very much aware that there's something that is beyond that. And what's beyond that is there is no them. There's only us. We're all in this together. And, when we see the world more from, and we're all struggling to do this in our own ways, but I think many of us have the capacity, at least occasionally, to be able to see the world from that place of beyond that first tier into the second tier, and see that many other people from different traditions, not just the integral philosophy community, but the metamodernism community, or the Game B community, or the community that comes from the indigenous cultures that speaks about the age of the eagle and the condor, and the heart and the brain coming together. Like these ways of viewing what needs to be done, what needs to be built, what needs to be born, are beginning to percolate. I certainly sense kind of all around the world, all over the place, in many different ways, with many different subtle flavors, but they all retain the capacity to see that we are all in this together, and we have to know that and operate out of that place.
Nice. Thank you for taking us right into the deep end. And this is what's great when we get to have these conversations when we're, in the same community. And I think I want to riff with you here for a minute, because this bears repeating. I think the people that are going to tune into a conversation like this may already be spun up with integral theory and this kind of developmental philosophy. But I think many people, I often have to catch myself, aren't. And so you gave a really good summary overview, but I just want to touch into it, one more time to make sure we're covering things. So you said, these three dominant logic systems, and you gave a nod to spiral dynamics, which is one of the more leading approaches to the broad field of developmental psychology, and the research that's been done throughout history on that. There's lots of early childhood development research, of how children grow through predictable stages, but we've seen that also humans through the whole lifespan, adults go through predictable stages of development, and those patterns aren't that hard to connect. And so spiral dynamics is one of the more approachable models for this, and the work of Ken Wilber and many others have broken this down for us so that we can have more nuanced conversations like this. And these three logic systems that you just broke down here, I think are the easiest to point out, and to point out outside of us, and also to point out within us, and that these live within me. And the more that I'm intimate with how they live within me is the key to how I can see how I respond to conflict and have better relationships and all these. And you walked us through it, the first being the traditional, mindset, amber blue meme of this ethnocentric, paternalistic, us versus them mindset, which also happens to have really a beautiful approach to family, community, and values. But when we start seeing the limitations of its us versus themness, thus was born the modern worldview, this orange meme, as we call it in code, of where the hierarchy of, it's still an us versus them, but it's kind of like a better versus worse type of mindset, where we're looking for, it's like, no, what's the what's the most objectively measurable best way to do something. And that took us leaps and bounds as a humanity forward in our progress, but also cracked a few eggs in the process, hence birthing the postmodern worldview, the green meme, as we call it, of going away from the individual into focusing more on the collective and making sure that there's equal rights, an egalitarian mindset. And then, as you very well described, the disasters on that side. And that was kind of hearkening back to the first episode of this podcast where we talked about postmodernism there, of how it can be a bit of a circular firing squad, of where the core logic of the unhealthy postmodern perspective is kind of broken, is fallacious, and can end up causing, in some ways, more damage than all of the previous combined. But that's our integral worldview that we share in our community was kind of birthed out of the challenges of postmodernity. So we love to pick on green and do that, but it's our true intention, our effort to integrate the healthy aspects of all of these. And the degree to which someone is integral, as that tends to go around these communities, is the degree to which that we have an awareness of our addictions and allergies to our own inner ethnocentricity or meritocratic hierarchic tendencies and our egalitarian tendencies. And so you closed it off quite well by saying it's like, right, there's not a them out there. I like how Alexander Solzhenitsyn put it in his famous quote of, if only it were so simple, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessarily only to separate them from the rest and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, and who's willing to destroy a piece of their own heart? And that's really the ultimate challenge there is how can we actually find those parts within us and love them and take care of them. And that's how we love and take care of each other.
Yeah. And so going back to what our project is, it's like, well, how can I first accept what is? And how can I do that with both gratitude and forgiveness for all the things that aren't going well? Right. And I think that that's a central theme for each of us as individuals trying to become more healthy and more whole. And it's really the essence of, okay, so these new systems that we have to build as we look at the healthcare system in the context of all of the other infrastructures and institutions and industries that are similarly going through this deep questioning about viability long term, this apparent and clearly more and more increasingly obvious unsustainability of business as usual when it comes to our education system, when it comes to the way that we do criminal justice and law enforcement, the way that we grow our food, the way that we produce our energy. I mean, childcare, you go on and on. So we know we have deep problems, right, that permeate through our entire civilizational construct and societal construct. And we know that there's this capacity to build systems and to live in a community that is more resilient, that is more healthy in general, right? So how do we get there? And I think that it's so important to come from a place where we're not reacting with rage. It's actually very easy to look around at the injustices in my profession in particular, and just be consumed with rage. It's like, how can it be this way? How can it be so messed up? And so rather than allow ourselves to be consumed with rage, I've gone through, I will absolutely admit, like openly, that I've gone through like profound existential crises, like profound heartbreaks in my career as a physician, in response to or in the context of the pain and suffering that I witnessed and in many ways sort of was complicit in, participatory in the systemic approach to how my own personal patients were sort of sucked into the vortex of of a system that in many ways, again, has so many beautiful elements and aspects to it, but also has these big, huge problems. And so when we go back to the good and the bad and the ugly, or what's working well and should be kept, what's missing and what should be added, I laid out the areas that are problematic with some care, and some thought, and I call it my 10 heartbreaks. And
Excellent.
so,
Excellent.
If we want to start there and kind of walk through at least a few of those, and then afterwards we can go into what's actually missing, because fundamentally what's missing, we can touch this very quickly as an overview,
Great.
is that we have a system that's almost singularly pathotherapeutic in essence, meaning its entire raison d'etre is the application of synthetic chemical molecules or surgery to treat disease states or symptoms. And what therefore is completely lacking is a coherent sort of framework and understanding and epistemology of what it actually means to be healthy and what it means to heal, and how we begin to talk about what that looks like from a broader perspective in a way that honors the root of the word health. And the root of the word health comes from wholeness and also holiness. So there's an element of the sacred to the concept of health, and there's an element of integrating and bringing together all the different fragments so that there is more of a coherence, more of a wholeness. So that's what's missing, and we can come back to that. But in terms of like what's not going well and what needs to be like radically, in my opinion, and in many ways already is being re-envisioned or reformulated or rethought.
Great.
Are these 10 elements? Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, this is great. And so as you said, this is not for us to feel further enraged about what's broken. I like how you call it your 10 heartbreaks, because this is an opportunity for us in some ways to grieve what's not working and set the stage for being more solution oriented and not complaining about it, but seeing where the opportunities are being integrated and looking for what's missing. And thanks for going ahead and labeling the pathotherapeutic state of things and coming from, pathos of suffering. So that our generally our whole healthcare system, at least in the West, is that right? That is focused primarily on symptoms and on suffering. That doesn't go for all of humanity. Is that an appropriate distinction?
I think that's right. I mean, in this case, pathos really is what we used to define the state of illness and disease, which may imply suffering. But I also think that it's right to point out that there are other traditions in other parts of the world and in other times that had a deeper connection to the other concepts. So patho or disease or pathos kind of should be dovetailed or married to the other side of the coin, which is saluto, which is the concept of being healthy and whole. And so we're very interested in Aaron Antonovsky's terminology of salutogenesis, which is to be really inquisitive and very curious about the origins of health and the origins of healing and the necessary elements that health and healing are, required to manifest. So we don't want to throw out any baby with the bathwater, because there's so much utility in that pathogenic or pathotherapeutic perspective, but it really is missing this whole other half, which is, okay, great. Now that we understand how to treat illness or how to treat symptoms, let's really go back. And in some ways, it isn't going back. In some ways, it's really tapping into indigenous traditions and all kinds of other stuff. And these things are continuously being co-evolved, but we can use, I think, very modern approaches to understanding health and healing, and see how they maybe are informed by those more ancient and indigenous traditions to really have a robust and deep sense of even where to begin, and I think that, I mean, by no means am I claiming to be an expert. It's just a felt sense that this is deeply missing. And, I've always been very passionate about exploring how we can bring more of that salutogenesis in with the pathotherapeutic aspect. So.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, so there's a lot of territory for us to cover here, and I remember when I first started learning about this, it was like discerning like allopathic, from homeopathic and things like that. But before we're going to spin off into a lot of rabbit holes, knowing you and I. But let's hear the 10 heartbreaks, and we'll go from there.
So again, just being honest, just being open. This did come initially from a place of rage. And I think you were right to point out that that is a process of grieving, and that, as Elizabeth Kubler-Ross laid out very neatly in her work, she's like, look, grieving originates with denial, and then it goes into anger, and then it goes into other states of, disbelief and sadness and things. And then eventually, if healing is to take place, that grieving can take us to a place of integration. And again, this is my very humble attempt from that place of having gone through some of those stages of grief early in my career. I mean, openly weeping over some of these horrors. I think we can do better, but in order to do better, we have to start with just being completely clean, completely honest about what it is that we're doing. And so what it is that we're doing, and these 10 heartbreaks I lay them out as the 10 P's, so the first P is payment. And the fact of the matter is that we're still the leading cause of bankruptcy in America, the healthcare system. And the tragedy is that many of the people that end up being forced into bankruptcy due to healthcare bills actually have insurance. So to sort of fall into the trap of thinking, oh, this is because we just don't have enough people who are insured. Well, that's not really the problem, because many people are effectively uninsured when there's no insurance to be spoken of until you hit $10,000 of a deductible, right? And it's only after that your quote unquote plan kicks in. So many people don't have $10,000 laying around, and they find themselves effectively uninsured even when they're paying the mortgage payment or more that it takes to purchase a premium with a commercial health plan these days, for a family of four. So being the number one cause of bankruptcy is something that we have to really look squarely in the eye. We have to say, oh my gosh, we spent in 2019 $3.4 trillion on the entire U.S. government. The federal budget was $3.4 trillion, and yet the healthcare expenses were $3.7 or $3.8 trillion.
Amazing. So
we're already eclipsing the entire federal budget, and in a few short years, not in 20 years, but like in the next 5 to 6 years, we are on the trajectory of spending $6 trillion a year on healthcare alone. And according to Forbes magazine, we're also on the trajectory that the millennial generation is going to spend 2/3 of their life earnings on healthcare bills.
So help me understand this a little better. Like, where is this money going? Because we're all spending a lot of money out of our pockets on health insurance every month, or those of us that can. And then you're saying more than is collected by the IRS is also going into the healthcare system. So where's all this money going?
Well, the quick answer is, I'll tell you where 3.3 billion of it is going every single day. And that's to administration. That's to the bureaucratic aspects of this extremely lopsided system that spends way too much energy and time and money on things that have absolutely nothing to do with treating people or taking care of anybody.
Yeah.
So that's a fundamental problem. And it also bears noting that unfortunately there are many for-profit entities within the healthcare system that are honestly are taking far more than their share. You know, there are CEOs of health insurance companies that are not just making a $20 million a year salary, but their retirement bonuses
Right.
amount to $110 million. So if one individual amongst all of the board and all of the C-level people and all of the different stockholders and shareholders, one of those is getting a retirement bon voyage farewell gift of $110 million while everybody's premiums are going up, obviously there's some kind of a deep problem that's inherent to it. So I would say there are many, many inefficiencies in the system.
Yep.
There are many, many aspects of the system that are full of graft. And I would say that the alternative to that, or one of the pathways to a better place when it comes to the healthcare economics, and one of the most immediately scalable would be to unbundle primary care, which generally comprises about 90% of all healthcare encounters, from the insurance system altogether, and have patients contract directly to their primary care providers independent of an insurance entity.
Yep.
And thereby everybody in America, and I know this all sounds so fanciful, but if you do the math, this has merit. So everybody in America can actually have their private personal physician on speed dial.
Yep.
Right? We have the numbers, we have the amount of physicians necessary to provide that kind of care right now, today. There's 220,000 primary care physicians. And we've demonstrated at my practice, Cloud Medical, that there's a kind of a sweet spot somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 patients per doctor at the most.
Wow.
And that's a very, very doable number because the average currently is about 2,400 patients per doctor. That's the average in the US. If you multiply 220,000 primary care physicians by 1,500 patients each, which is still 1,000 less than they're taking care of now, you actually get 330 million, which is about the number of
Population
American
of the United
citizens.
States.
Yeah. So we have the math, we have the capacity, we have the scalability to do this.
We have the technology.
And,
yeah.
And the technology is key, because having your doctor on speed dial on your cell phone will, and we've demonstrated this over and over, decrease the dependency on ER for unnecessary encounters. It will catch things earlier than if your average wait time to see your primary care physician is 2 weeks.
That's right.
It will allow you to, as we walk through the other 9 heartbreaks, find a way of greater efficiency of practice and a greater economy of scale. So I really think that one of the key ways, because it's such a complex and convoluted problem, but if we call out the first heartbreak to be this payment problem and the cost problem, and this runaway train of running out of money very soon, I would say that the first approach would be, let's unbundle the toasters from the tornadoes. In other words, you would call your Allstate agent for your homeowner's insurance policy if a tornado rips the roof off your house. But if you called them, if your toaster breaks, and say, hey man, I'm not sure what to do, my toaster just broke. Well, he would give you a very quizzical look, right? He'd say, well, why are you calling me? Just buy a $50 toaster. What we do in primary care medicine is we take care of the toasters. Most of what we do is in that $100 price point. So for around $100 a month, we can offer people unlimited visits, no copays, 24/7 access. We can take care of the vast majority of their skin cancer surgeries at no additional cost. We can do all of their minor trauma at no additional cost. There's no copay if you call me at 7 o'clock on a weekend because you just cut yourself and you need stitches. You just come in, we'll unlock the office and stitch you up. And that
Amazing.
goes for asthma attacks and panic attacks and nosebleeds that won't go in. All of the stuff that happens day to day that lands people in the emergency room, we can offload that. And it's not something that would be nice or is theoretically interesting. We have a track record and a proof of concept that goes back a decade now. So it's a very viable way.
This is really mind-blowing, and I've been working with you for a number of years, and it's like, but just putting it all into the perspective of how it rolls up to addressing the systemic challenges of the healthcare economic system, you know, and it makes me think it's like a lot of the way it seems that healthcare insurance companies are responding to this are by offering like this teledoc service thing, which almost sounds like a Band-Aid compared to what you're describing. Because like, you know, a teledoc might be able to like call in a prescription for me. They can't stitch me up anytime soon, or they're not going to be able to like actually give any kind of high touch care beyond just being able to get on the phone with me. Is that right?
Well, it is a Band-Aid. You know, first of all, it's not somebody that it's not somebody with whom you have a relationship that's based on reverence and devotion.
Yeah.
Which is the type of relationship that we foster with our patients. It's like we're here in reverence and devotion to serve your highest self, your highest health, your highest capacity to be well, to flourish, and to thrive. And how can we be of service to that? So that when you have that acute urgency, the teledoc may be able to prescribe a medication, but is there any follow-up to that medication? You know, is somebody checking on you afterwards? Is there any connection and greater context of a relationship? And sometimes that doesn't matter. You know, there are certain things like an ear infection probably wouldn't be the end of the world. But in many cases, it's part of a bigger story, right? And, you know, I believe that when we get to know people over time and they get to know us, and when we develop trust over time and they learn how to trust us, and the reliance, the reliability, the thing that begins to blossom is a deep human connection based on love. And that is such a fundamental problem related to the 10th heartbreak, which is that physicians are losing any kind of a sense of belief in what we're doing. I mean, the amount of disillusionment in this field of medicine is absolutely astonishing. We are now the #1 profession for suicide. There's a doctor somewhere in the United States that commits suicide every single day. #1. The exodus from this profession as a career path, because more and more of the insurance-based bureaucratic paradigm not only costs $3.3 billion a day that's wasted, but it creates so many hurdles and obstacles and burdens between exactly that kind of a relationship that we were just talking about. And if we are to recover the soul of medicine, recover the soul of this profession, we have to go back to that fundamental thing, which is the doctor-patient relationship. And that has to be treated as sacred. And it can't be teledoced away, right? It can't just be like, oh, well, you are expendable to me, I'm expendable to you. The continuity of care is not that important, and anyone can substitute at any time. And yeah, I mean, you talk to most people these days, they haven't seen the same physician consistently, like for years. They see somebody new every time they go in. And I think that's, again, one of the ways in which we're failing, and one of the ways that's so easy to fix instantly with this new way of doing primary care called DPC, or direct primary care, where everybody has a personal relationship with their own private doctor who they know will be available to them at their time of need, independent of time and space. Doesn't matter what time it is or where you are in this beautiful planet. We can
Yep.
always hop on WhatsApp or Skype or Zoom or text or whatever and get through whatever issue that you're struggling with.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, I had been wanting to go further into direct primary care, and I think you really set it up in an amazing way here. So further break our heart if you can rebuild us in these ways.
Yeah. So the second one is practice, and the practice of medicine, despite the fact that all graduating doctors, swear the Hippocratic oath when they receive their diploma, including myself and all of my colleagues, we're still the third leading cause of death in America, and this is all before COVID, by the way. All these statistics are before COVID, so they're just only getting worse. There was a study done by Barbara Starfield, who's a master's in public health as well as a family physician who recently passed. But in the year 2000, she did this very well-designed study and compiled the leading causes of death in America. And sure enough, after number one and number two, cancer and cardiovascular disease, the iatrogenic practice of medicine is the third leading cause. And people were like, well, we don't believe that. It can't be that bad. And so this study was repeated by Johns Hopkins in 2016. Exactly the same result, still number three. So
iatrogenics being harm done by the healer in kind of historical terms.
Yeah. So medical errors, drug interactions, nosocomial infections, all of the things that the healthcare system, obviously, talk about heartbreaks. Like, there's nothing more heartbreaking to any physician out there that practices medicine than to cause the demise of their patient inadvertently. But this isn't like rare. This is why haven't we sort of just hit the reset button and taken a step back and said, we really, really need to look at this and see how we can identify all of the areas in which improvements need to be made to turn this around. When the study first came out, I was in residency, and it was brought up during grand rounds, and business as usual. You just went on with the rest of our day, like nothing really, to the degree that I think this warrants attention was given. And in the last 20 years, we've just sort of skirted and flirted around the issue. And so I think as MDs, it's very important that we look at the way that we're treating people and look at ways where the risk-benefit ratio is recalibrated with respect to those therapeutics that we were talking about. In other words, are there other different paradigms that we can adopt where the risk is much, much lower, and how can we do that in a state of balance? So how can we do that while still retaining the great benefits of all of the vast arrays of treatments that are available that are in many ways life-saving and decrease suffering and improve quality of life. And so for me, where I'm standing and my perspective, I would say, if you look at the naturopathic field, the field of naturopathy, so these are also physicians, they're doctors of naturopathy as opposed to MDs. And you look at functional medicine, this is the approach to, looking at more of the source causes of medicine rather than throwing Band-Aids at everything. I mean, these are just two very practical, pragmatic ways that can be integrated and implemented at a greater level. And certainly in my practice, I have found to be very useful, just that perspective, that worldview from the field of naturopathy, which says, hey, before we start a drug, are there some natural ways, either through lifestyle or nutraceutical herbal supplementation, that we can get to the same desired outcome rather than just using the pharmacotherapeutic angle immediately out of the gates? And we know that is in many cases much safer. We know that in many cases it's so much more effective. I mean, one of the pandemics, when we talk about all the different pandemics
Yeah.
in addition to COVID, that are simultaneously evolving. Diabetes and obesity and the metabolic diseases are certainly one of them. And that pandemic, doesn't respond well to drugs, but it
Right.
responds impeccably well to very potent and very precise lifestyle modification. So we can get into all of the
Yeah.
ways of helping people become metabolically flexible, metabolically adapted, so they can harness the energetic power of their own ketones rather than just be glucose dependent. But the point is that a more natural approach is, I think, deeply, deeply warranted.
Oh, I gotta just jump in for a second. I mean, we could spend the rest of the recording just talking about this rabbit hole, and it probably merits it in a certain sense. But I think you talked about the medicine being third leading cause of death and the iatrogenics of this. And I think this is where the fear of hospitals come from.
Yeah.
And well, then when we talk about naturopathy, and it's like we can see the functional fit of that, but I think there's many people in the world, in the United States in particular, that still hear the word naturopathy and think of witch doctors, and think that of quackery, and probably for some good reasons, right? Where I just heard the other day of where, someone was taking their cat to a naturopathic, veterinarian, and that refused to give them antibiotics. That didn't work out so well for the cat. That just needed straight up science. The reason I'm saying this is just to give extra compassion to the understanding where we fall on one side or another of these tricky arguments, that there's good reasons for that. And it's not just to say medicine is wholesale wrong, like allopathic medicine. It's not right or wrong. It has its functional fit, as does naturopathy, as does all the different sides of it.
Exactly. And I think knowing when to use which is certainly a critical component, but not discounting them in a wholesale way that you're describing is absolutely critical. Being educated in both of these paradigms or in the alternatives is critical. And if we're going to do no harm, or if we're going to strive to do no harm in a real way, then I think starting with the less risky things and carefully monitoring people, or in this case, cats, is the right way to go, So,
right.
But yeah, I mean, the whole lifestyle medicine and the anti-aging medicine innovations, I would say over the last couple of decades, have really gotten us to a point where, we understand that it's not medicating our way out of these chronic conditions that are becoming, as I said, epidemic. It's figuring out a smart way of optimizing our lives, our lifestyle, and knowing where health actually originates from, back to the whole salutogenesis conversation. So
brilliant. Well, yeah, we won't go into how this speaks to vaccines just yet. We'll save the real hot button topics for later. But yeah, let's keep going. So ready to move on to number 3?
Yeah. So the third one is it's another big one, man. It's profit. So here we have the poor capacity to discern between prescribing and selling. I think we've conflated these two terms to our great detriment and to our patients' disservice. And let me first say that I don't judge anyone for doing anything their way. We're all trying to figure this out. But I think that there's definitely a right way and a wrong way to approach the peddling of the various services and goods that we offer in our practice. And one of the things that I love the most about direct primary care is when a patient becomes a member of a DPC like Cloud Medical, they are basically entering a relationship where you hire us to be your world champion advocates for your health, but also your pocketbook.
Yeah.
And so it is absolutely a core value that we don't sell to our patients anything. We don't sell supplements. We don't sell injections. We don't sell peptides. We don't sell diagnostic tests. We don't sell labs. I mean, we literally just say, look, as a member, you are now able to participate with all of these offerings at a net zero profit. Our financial model does not embody a conflict of interest where I have to pay my mortgage or get my kid through college by selling you $400 worth of supplements every month.
So Purdue can't come over to you and say, hey, right. Dr. T,
you need more Oxycontin sales. Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's not just the harmful tragedy of, the field of pain management medicine where that literally happens, and we've seen that with many of these pain management clinics that get people addicted to extremely potent opiates and then insist that they come once a month and pay them very high dollars to refill their prescription. But it also goes to just a payment paradigm where it's constructed on the basis of selling things to people. I believe, like, it just doesn't make sense to me in any other way. I deeply believe that to offer a medical recommendation in the form of a prescription should have no strings attached, right?
Yeah.
So the minute that I am incentivized to profit, or any of my staff are incentivized to profit off of sales of diagnostics or therapeutics, there's an immediate inherent bias there. And I can't ever really be sure, no matter how hard I try, that doesn't impact that recommendation, that yep. sense of what is really in the best interest of that patient. And since I can't ever really be sure, I think it's better not to do it. And I think that that's why we have these innovative payment models. We're all playing with ways of how do we exchange goods and services in a way that is most ethical, and I think a monthly subscription membership model is one of the most ethical ways of doing it, because after that, there is no sell. After that, everything is at break-even costs. And so
sounds like a liberating boundary as a professional to have that, and like to fully just respect that as humans we're prone towards unethical behavior in some ways. And instead of just saying it's like, well, we should just be hyper aware of incentives. No, you're just kind of making it easier on yourself and everybody else by just setting a hard boundary there.
Oh, it's absolutely liberating. It feels so clean. I always talk about keeping the karma clean between the doctor and the patient, and just to know that there's no impulse to make somebody take more stuff when that may or may not be exactly what is in their best interest, just feels so much more, as you say, liberating. So, yeah, which goes straight into the fourth Great. One, which is power. So in the healthcare system, I feel that there's one overarching goal that should be just straight out implicit in the whole system, and that's that we should strive to help our patients become as empowered as possible whenever possible. And unfortunately, when we see somebody who gets diagnosed with diabetes and we're sitting there and we tell them, look, we only have 7 minutes to go over this, but your labs show that you're diabetic. And what we need to do is have you come in once a month to get this prescription. And it's a medication to reduce your blood sugar. We've just missed such a potent opportunity that can be very, very healing and very transformational. And as opposed to asking, well, what can we do to help you optimize your life? Because we know that diabetes comes from your relationship to food and the way that we're eating and the way that we're shopping for food and the way that we're preparing it and the way that we're, the timing of it when we eat, as well as all of the other components of lifestyle, hydration and exercise and stress and sleep and so forth, rather than spending a few minutes helping people know to the core of their being that in the vast majority of these new onset diabetes cases, not all, sometimes it's an immune problem, it's type 1 diabetes, it's not type 2, but most of it is type 2, and most of it is lifestyle based. And we can tell them with beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is reversible.
Yeah.
This is something that you can take charge of. This is something that you can grab by the horns and immediately alter. And, in many cases, immediately means literally they come back in 2 months and they're non-diabetic. It's that powerful of an intervention. That, again, isn't the way the mainstream system is constructed. It's, no, I am the doctor. I will hold the power. I have the power here in the form of a prescription. You will do as I say, and you will be a compliant patient. You will fill this prescription, and when it's time for a refill, you'll come back for more. I mean, that is the opposite of empowering our patients with the ability to transform their lives so that they're more in line with their best and highest capacity to be healthy.
Do you think doctors are aware of this to some degree? And like, if so, what's the narrative they're holding there around not taking the opportunity to do this or holding on to that power? Or is it just a subconscious thing?
Yeah, I think it's very complex, but I think that is one of the key reasons that we're so disillusioned as a profession, so jaded, and why so many of our patients have lost trust in the healthcare system itself, and that is that deep down we are becoming more and more aware that many of our patients are sidestepping the mainstream system and actually getting better faster, number one. Number two is that we were kind of misled by omission, at minimum, in our medical training, and that we weren't taught about the impact of lifestyle medicine.
Yeah.
And then number three, we've been gutted with our own ability to be empowered as so-called healers with the capacity to step back and to actually have the time that it takes. So it doesn't take an infinite amount of time, but it takes more than 7 minutes to have that kind of an interaction, to have that kind of a conversation.
It's like a resource problem.
The rat race mill that has been effectively dictated, and it's like there's no way out. You can't do it in any other way. Like, somebody's always tracking your volume, and if you're not seeing the requisite amount of patients per hour, the boss is going to talk to you, or the owner of the practice is going to talk to you, or somebody's going to say, look, you're going to have to perform faster. And so the ultimate result of all of those different things are that, the patient is disempowered with the transmission of, listen, you can do this. I've got your back. We're going to do this together. I'm going to support you in any possible way that I can. And here's how it works. You have to do the heavy lifting, right? You have to do the work, but I'm going to monitor you and support you through this process. And ultimately it's your life and it's your capability, right? And that then leads into the fifth P, which is potential, which is, by virtue of the scenario that I just described, we also remove the implicit message that our patients have an innate capacity to heal, right? The innate capacity to recover, to heal, and to improve their lives, to improve their health. And again, I'm not trying to pretend that everybody can heal everything, or that we can heal cancer and all of our heart disease, or all of our Alzheimer's. But I am saying that we all have an innate capacity, and that in at least from my perspective, from where I'm standing, from what I've seen, what I've witnessed and experienced, we do way, way too much pontificating about what someone can and can't do. And the example that is like so obvious is that Lance Armstrong's oncologist told him, well, you will never bike again after this testicular cancer. And he went on to win 7 tours, regardless of how you feel about his history of doping and all of that. We tell people, you will never walk again. You will never do this again, all the time. Like, this happens all day long. We tell people, who ask, well, gee, doctor, it looks like I have blood in my urine. What could that be? And 99% of the time, that's either a benign, or not a benign urinary tract infection, but something that's very easy to treat, or a kidney stone that's also generally fairly quick in terms of recovery. And we plant the seed and we tell them, well, it could be cancer. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've received a phone call from someone who's just devastated and distraught and crying. They're like, I think I might have cancer. And I'm like, well, why the hell do you think that? They're like, well, my doctor told me there's blood in my urine. I'm like, I know, but you're 25 years old. You know, you probably have a benign UTI that just needs an antibiotic for a few days. And so this, I think it's an injudicious wielding of the immense power that we have, that we should really respect and honor much, much more. And
why are they doing this? Like, it's hard for me to believe that they're just so out of it, that they're just doing this out of a power trip. Is there any reason why they would want to kind of scare the person with a cancer threat instead of, like, I don't know. This is hard for me to wrap my mind around.
It's hard to wrap one's mind around. I think, for me, it was just that no one ever talked about it. No one ever sat down and said, your words, particularly since you only have 7 minutes to speak, right? Your words have so much weight. So be very mindful how you speak.
Yeah.
Be very mindful of the placebo effect, but also the nocebo effect, right? How something that we say or do could be very, very impactful in a negative way. Be very mindful of your intonation and your tone and the transmission of your messaging, and be precise with your words, and always be careful about ensuring that the power stays with the patient and that their knowledge and awareness of their own innate capacity to heal remains implicitly and explicitly communicated to them. And that goes for the most devastating illnesses, by the way. That goes for, because the minute you take away people's hope, the minute you take away their sense that they have some agency in this whole aspect, boy, you've just taken away so much. And well, so I think
sorry to interrupt you. Is there another side to this? Is there a problem in a doctor encouraging someone to kind of take naive responsibility into their hands with serious illness? And is there any reason why it would be encouraging for a doctor to kind of be soberingly straight?
Mm-hmm. I think that it's important to be straight, right?
Yep.
But it's important to be humble and straight, meaning this is what it looks like. This is what it probably is based on our most sophisticated ability to diagnose this problem. But at the end of the day, we don't really know. And I'm sure you and I'm sure you've heard many times, as have I, people that have been given horrific diagnoses. You have 10 days left, or a few weeks left, or a few months left, and they're around for 10 years. So absolutely, we don't want to be, cavalier with some kind of an overly rosy transmission of what is within the most likely outcome. But I think to just completely remove that from the table, to remove our ability to have the capacity to even integrate other aspects beyond just the pharmacotherapeutic remedies and medications, to go deeper into that realm of healing that we were touching on earlier. The humility is oftentimes lacking, and we pretend to know everything, but there's just so much that we don't know.
Yeah, this is really helpful for me to be unpacking this, because I can imagine someone could irresponsibly not take more direct action if they think, oh, it's like all I have to do is change my diet on this and that's going to cure things. But what I need to bring this up. This is one of the things I wanted to bring up with you in this conversation, and relevant to what's happening right now through the pandemic, in that it is impossible to find anyone on mainstream media saying, hey, by the way, eat a better diet, you get your immune system. It's almost like they think the immune system is a fairy tale or something like that. And the only conversation is like allopathic based. And it's been very hard for me to come up with an understanding of why that's such a mainline transmission there. Can you help me understand that any better?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the cynical, honest fact of the matter, is that this goes back to the first payment problem and the way that the incentives are aligned with respect to the whole healthcare system. And that is that the only thing that is the generative origin of value, of currency in the system that generates value and that allows the entire machine to run is a synthetic molecule that can be patented.
Right.
And the minute that we can produce a synthetic molecule that can be patented, we can launch that as a therapeutic modality. We can brand it, and then we can sell it through the various channels. And if we have a focus on boosting immunity naturally, or if we have a focus on reversing diabetes through diet, or if we have a focus on all of these other ways of arriving at an even better place without using drugs or vaccines or surgical procedures, that doesn't create that flow of the type of currency, the only type of currency that has value in the system that makes the whole thing run, from the insurance companies to big pharma to the whole medical industrial complex.
Well, I'm sure, McDonald's would not be happy if the mainstream media was saying don't eat at McDonald's, but it really does. It really hurts to have that cynicism, to really just believe that every media company out there is refusing to talk about building your immune system because, people aren't going to make money from it. But I guess it's about as irrational as answer as we have.
Yeah. There's a bunch more. We can keep going. I don't know how
that's it. I apologize for pulling us off track there, but this is great. I mean, this is really a rich territory, and the way that you've codified it here is heartbreaking, but it does seem to summarize. Well, why don't you just list 6 through 10 there, just so that we have the full map, and I'll interrupt less if I can.
Yeah. So the 6th is precision. Mm-hmm. Which is I don't think we do enough as a system of aggregating the therapies that, as I've alluded to, in some ways are miraculous and magical and absolutely life and health enhancing. And there are many of those, even just like the migraine medications, the amount of suffering that a good triptan has relieved for people who have debilitating migraines. And never mind the other really like big tech stuff, like the fact that we can take somebody's liver out that's going to fail due to cirrhosis in a few months and implant a fresh liver and they go on to live 20 more years. I mean, that's still mind blowing to me.
Astounding.
And now with the emerging gene therapies, which include, by the way, the new mRNA COVID vaccine,
right,
and all kinds of cancer vaccines that are coming down the pike. I mean, the ability to do gene editing and gene replacement, to take faulty genes and to use these ingenious delivery mechanisms to implement an mRNA molecule into our own cells and use that molecule as a template to use our own cellular machinery to make the protein that's missing. Like, that's completely astounding. And so there are these applications of, the miracles of modern science that I think we should just be very, very grateful for, while at the same time knowing that wait a minute, well, these particular drugs over here actually have a very marginal benefit and a fairly significant capacity to do harm. So the precision comes down to being as precise as we can to calculate the risk-benefit ratio for a given prescription, which again, I feel that in general, we could do better as a country. We could do better as a healthcare system. And so being very overt about, rather than saying, well, you have a problem and there's a drug for that, saying, well, you have a problem, but for this particular condition, the medications that we have an outcome that we can calculate based on number needed to treat.
Yeah.
NNT. And number needed to treat means that we have to treat, let's say the NNT is 10. So we have to treat 10 people for one to benefit. So that means that the drug is, well, it's only 10% effective or 10% likely to be effective. It means that it's 90% unlikely to be effective. And let's just be honest about that. And when we're honest about that, the sad thing is that many of our medications have an NNT of 100. It's like, wait a minute, I have to give this medicine to 99 people or 100 people, 99 of which will have no benefit, only 1% potentially will benefit. If we were a little bit more transparent about that risk-benefit ratio during our conversations with our patients, which again comes back to, well, we need to have more than 7 minutes to unpack all of this, right? And allow them to engage in that dialogue on that conversation of risk versus benefits. Like, is this a medicine that I should take? Yes or no? And oh, by the way, there's another side to that equation, which is NNH, number needed to harm, right? And the risks and the side effects and the potential adverse effects are also not zero. So where does that balance fall? And so, again, that's number 6. Number 7 is Perspicuity, which has a deeper dive into the lack of transparency as I see it in the healthcare system. I think that what I have witnessed is that we have this tremendous Wizard of Oz screen behind which most people cannot peer. And the Wizard of Oz screen includes the cost of things, you know, it includes all the stuff we were talking about, the side effects of things, the potential actual positive effects of things, and the calculation of the risk benefits. Like, well, I may or may not want to get this test, doctor, but it sort of depends on how much it's going to cost me and what my deductible is. And if I have a $10,000 deductible, with like most people currently, I may decide not to do this MRI of the knee, you know, depending on what that's going to cost. And so you ask, well, how much is it going to cost? And the answer is, we don't know.
Yeah. And
so then you call around and you call the imaging center. You say, look, my doctor wants me to have this test, this MRI scan. How much is it going to cost? Oh, we don't know that. Every insurance has a different contracted rate. It's like, why does every insurance have a different contracted rate? Why does it have to be so smoke and mirrors? With again, back to the DPC, which we have endeavored to find the antidote to all of these heartbreaks, right? In the direct primary care and cloud medical model, we find by hook or by crook, if necessary, the exact price for every test, for every medication, for every diagnostic before we actually order it, so that none of our patients ever leave the practice without knowing that to the penny. And then that goes into the informed decision-making about whether or not that's actually something that we want to do, because again, back to the number one cause of bankruptcy. If we're not transparent about the pricing, we're going to continue to do harm. The 8th is privacy. I think we can do so much better with respect to being very clear about what this whole HIPAA thing is all about, right? So HIPAA is a privacy law that protects our sensitive medical information against snooping neighbors and people like that. But what most people don't realize is that it in no way shape, or form protects you against the two entities that you probably want to shield your sensitive data against most, which is the US government and all the insurance companies. So they have free reign to all of this data. And
Amazing.
again, some of this data can be genomic in nature, right? Some of this data can be something that you really don't want to be out there in the ether. And by the way, you may want it to be out there. You may want it to be available to GWAS studies, genome-wide association studies that link certain kind of genetic mutations to a certain kind of phenotype, so type of expression or disease state or whatever. And you may say, hey, I want to actually have my data contribute to the body of knowledge that we have in the evolution of science. But I need to have that anonymized. I don't want my actual name attached to it. And oh, by the way, if you're going to use it, maybe I want to have some compensation because you're using my own genetic, biological information. And so that's a conversation that I think is very much needing to be had. And so one of the ways that we get around that at Cloud is, if there's something that's particularly sensitive, more sensitive than, let's say, your cholesterol number. Let's say it's running a test on all of the different cancer gene mutations that increase your risk of all the various cancers. Maybe you don't want that data floating around. Well, we anonymize it by using a pseudonym. So for people that want to have these tests, we make sure that their names are not their real names.
Yeah, a zero knowledge proof, which like with the emergence of the cryptocurrencies and everything is like this technology is here, but it's going to be a radical paradigm shift. So I'm loving that you're moving that ball forward.
Yeah. The next one is personal freedom. This has to do with kind of immunizing ourselves against the consensus panels and the group think that unfortunately I think is a little bit too dominant in the mainstream conventional healthcare paradigm, and all of the different protocols and rules, which I think are super valuable, by the way. I think it's absolutely critical that we have some kind of consensus statements on various things in terms of screening protocols and when and how we should do colon cancer screening, prostate cancer screening, when we should implement certain meds. Like all that's great. But we got to a situation here recently with COVID where some of these consensus panels run anywhere from the CDC to the WHO. We're literally forcing media like YouTube channels to remove any kind of narratives that did not conform to their version of the story. And again, you got to be very, very careful because sometimes there are people that have an agenda where they're selling things or they are nefarious in other ways. But to just wholesale discount, in this case, they were targeting many of the alternative healthcare personalities, the Andrew Wiles of the world, the Chris Kressers of the world, the Joe Dispenzas of the world were literally being targeted and removed. I mean, I think that is something that we have to fight for in this country. And this anti-censorship attitude that really formed the basic and the fabric of our society is something that unfortunately is coming under attack. So that personal freedom component is really important. And then the 10th one is the passion for medicine, which is, again, to bring back the passion from all of our hard working, man. Medicine is such a hard profession. We put so much time and energy into our training and the money that it takes. So to see how much disillusionment there is because of many of these reasons that we kind of laid out and itemized, it's time for a change. So it's time to get the soul back. And I don't pretend to have all the answers, but if I take a step back and say, what are the things that are wrong? And can we lay them out because it's not reducible to one problem? Can we sort of really aggregate them and see where we can provide some leverage to turn things around? These are 10 areas that I think are meaningful.
It seems to be quite comprehensive from my perspective, and a lot of the challenges that I hear myself and others complaining about and seeing as the challenge. But there's also a strong dose of compassion throughout here, of understanding that, in a sense, there's cynicism and all the human challenges, but what I'm getting out of the whole picture here is that really this is like a development, like an evolution issue here. It's like based on the evolution of our species, where we're at. This is what we're working with. And there's a lot of real beauty and goodness and truth, and the amount of people that are being helped. And right, that's often a thing that's hard to quantify, is like how many people is the healthcare system helping beyond being the third leading cause of death. How much is it helping as well? But I hear and feel your compassion throughout this, but also now have an upgraded kind of understanding of the trim tabs, like where we're moving and what do the innovations look like, and how something like direct primary care is addressing a lot of it.
Yeah, it's the opposite of the top-down approach. It's the opposite of instituting new regulatory policies from the top down. It's very grassroots. It's very pragmatic, very practical. All of these things, I think we can, if we agree, not everybody obviously agrees with me on these critiques, but if we agree with some of them, it is very feasible to very, very quickly create a different payment model, create a different way of practicing medicine that can be presented to a Main Street audience all around the country, and slowly but surely begin to right these wrongs, while at the same time celebrating all of the things that we do so well. So it's very exciting to see there's now 1,300 direct primary care practices around the country.
Brilliant.
When I started, there was 5. So it's fantastic to see this take some root and momentum.
It's amazing that it was so small, when it seems like such a traditional model. Like it seems like almost like a tribal model, where the health professionals are the ones that have this very high touch relationship with the people closest to them. And in looking at like varying European systems, I know there's kind of like neighborhood doctors, where that you're not allowed to go to the ER unless you get a note from your neighborhood doctor. And I don't know if that's a new thing or an old thing, or some version of both. But I want to just keep riffing with you on a few other things, if assuming you have time. This is a little bit longer of a recording, but it's great for me because I'm loving what you're bringing for us here. And I want to just hear more about what is the future of healthcare from your perspective. And in moving in that direction, you were just talking about, not being a top-down approach. So many people, it's an active debate about, socialized healthcare, which would be a top-down kind of a regulation-based approach. And people always kind of look romantically across the pond or up at Canada or something like that. Do you have kind of an elevator pitch on what your perspective on socialized healthcare is compared to what we're working with?
Yeah. So I think that we need universal care, right? But we need to be very clear about how to define that. And so there has to be some kind of a safety net that's better than what we have now, particularly when we've identified the 10 heartbreaks and the fact that we're the cause of bankruptcy and so on and so forth. And I think that where that needs to be optimized is in our understanding of what it actually means to be healthy and support healing, right? And so if we could create a local component of healthcare delivery that was based on exactly that, rather than sick care, which is perfectly amenable to an insurance-based, top-down medical industrial model. It's actually the best way to administer that. It's the most effective and efficient way, where there are economies of scale that can be used and so on and so forth, while at the same time, like radically preserving and maintaining and fortifying local provision of not just the sick care, but actual health care I think we'll go very, very far in addressing so many of the problems that we've been talking about. So if we look at where health or originates from, we might look at the kind of four quadrant perspective of the four disconnections. So if we reconnect to the four areas where our culture has been slowly but surely undermining our ability to connect and to communicate with those aspects of our lives. The first being our actual body, so we oftentimes live in this state of suspended animation, sort of our heads floating in outer space without being attuned to or without having an embodied sense with the sort of 60 trillion mortal cells that make up our body, right? The digestion and the core muscles that connect our upper body to our lower body, and really tuning into those, I think, we could do so much better on that level. The second disconnection is just being disconnected from our highest self. And here we can delve into being in greater communication with that part of us that's already all knowing, all loving, infinite, and eternal, right? And then the third is the connection between one another, the relationship space, right? Mm-hmm. Which is where we need a lot of focus. And since we're living in the most hyper-polarized society ever since we've been keeping track, an area that you have so much experience in, authentic relating practices and learning how to help one another evolve and grow and develop and, use the ways in which we may trigger one another as actually portals into a deeper form of relating, and use our relationships as golden mirrors for one another, where we can look at our friends or our family members and say, this is what I see, this amazing beauty within you that sometimes you're not even aware of, right? And I want you to just acknowledge and allow me to share with you the beauty that I see within you. While at the same time, here's the shadow side that I see in you, that you're not attending to enough. And I want to help you do that in a way that's with you and for you, for your highest truth and best interest.
Being able to have that conversation in a way that actually goes well.
That's right. And then the fourth is nature itself, right? So how do we relate to soil and water and air? And how do we interact with within our own lives, in our own communities, with nature in such a way that we're actually contributing to a cleaner form of soil, water, and air, rather than adding to its destruction? And how do we not just connect to nature by walking barefoot in the forest and putting our hands into the streams and getting plenty of sunshine, but actually participating in the systems that run our society that are in many ways extractive, and unsustainable long term. So these are the four ways in which we can connect more deeply, and through which I think we can discover health to the point where we won't need doctors nearly as much, right? But these are very local. These are very much related to how we live day to day. And I believe that a new healthcare paradigm is emerging where we can bring to bear the people that are neighbors, the people that live nearby within our own counties and within our own communities that are already participating in salutogenic endeavors and enterprises, and they're purveyors of goods and services that help us reconnect on all four of those ways. Reconnect to our body. There's amazingly skilled body workers that I think everybody should have the access to, no matter whether you're a professional triathlete or someone who has trouble getting off the couch. Like, we all need some instruction in this,
Yeah.
One of my favorite quotes is that in the future, the hospital, the school, and the monastery will be one place. So what is that curriculum of health? that we all need. So body workers, there are people that are very, very powerful coaches, mentors, guides, counselors, therapists in those interiors that allow us to connect and commune and communicate more closely with that highest aspect of ourselves, our interiors. And then certainly there's ways in which we can, in group settings, work together to hash out our triggers and to honestly deal with some of the deepest wounds of our nation, some of the ancestral trauma, some of the trauma around racism and slavery that we haven't recovered from, we haven't even begun to. And that is part of the healing that has to happen, that ultimately we are the generation that has the capacity to begin that if we're willing to take that up. And then if you ask, well, who are the real healers of our time? It's actually not the doctors or the body workers or the therapists, it's the farmers. That's the primary. The primary source of health is, how we grow our food, how we produce the crops and the vegetables and even the meat, and do it in a devoted way that's reverent to those waterways and to the soil and to the animals that are being produced, and to all the plant foods. And when you look around even a community like Boulder, and you think, oh, well, Boulder County, Colorado must be thriving in CSAs and all of these farm to table restaurants and all
Right.
of these amazing grass fed, like they're all suffering, particularly like even before COVID. Now it's a real disaster. So I think if we're to begin to even remotely tap into the potential and the capacity of our local ability to become more healthy as a society, to become more whole, to become more anti-fragile and resilient, like we have to start there. We have to identify where the health comes from and celebrate and support the people that are working on that, and sort of, as I often say, constellate the stars that are already shining. And so one of the ways that could happen is if we built a marketplace where all of these elements related to health, healing, and wellness were laid out for everybody to see. So sure, you need a doctor that will give you their cell phone so you have them on speed dial. Sure, you need a major medical plan, but you also need these other aspects. Like there has to be some component of connecting to one's body, connecting to one's interiors, connecting to one another, and healthy, nourishing, nurturing relationships. The Harvard study that was just completed, almost 100-year study.
Yeah.
What did they say was the number one correlate with health?
Relationships.
Positive, nourishing relationships. And the farmers and the purveyors of goods and services, they're salutogenic, starting with CSAs, beekeepers, the people that are producing personal care products with a very, very conscious perspective about, well, the source of the components of that toothpaste or that soap or that body oil, where it comes from, how it's harvested, the packaging, the upstream and downstream materials, all of this stuff. So the marketplace will hand select and curate kind of the best of class in all of these areas that we need in order to thrive, in order to be healthy.
And that's where, capitalism can actually really shine, is by, giving us that data. And so this is kind of like what you call like eudaimonic salutogenics, of like being fully conscious of upstream and downstream impact, like really, and this is a trend. This is happening, like full transparency in supply chains, that people actually want to know these things. It's not enough just to trust a brand. That we want to trust a brand that's actually going to have transparency of showing us where things come from, what the impact is, who are the people that are involved, and so then that can drive the market with even further granularity.
Exactly. And that's the whole premise of a project called Ravel Health, where that it's just that kind of a marketplace. So it's a new, more comprehensive, more cohesive, more integrated approach to defining the necessary elements to allow us to be healthy and to thrive, both on an individual basis as well as on a collective one. Because you can't do it alone. We need to do this together. Again, there is no them, there's only us. And we have seen what I believe is an overture, the first few lines of a symphony, which is a pandemic called COVID. And it pretty much almost broke the back of this country, economically devastating and in all of the other ways, maxed out our healthcare system capacities and so on and so forth. But, if you look what's coming down the pike with the other potential disruptions that could arise or likely will arise from, climate change induced food distribution pathway disruption and grid power outages and cybersecurity corruption and all that. I mean, we have to, I believe, fortify ourselves against further stressors. Mm-hmm. And so community health for me includes not only being able to very carefully map where the health comes from, but also understand where we're really vulnerable and where we need to fortify ourselves. And, that's the whole premise of the 40-40-40 concept, which is currently we import, even here in Boulder, well over 90% of everything that we use, everything that we consume, right? It's probably closer to 98% of is imported. Food, all the products that we buy. There are many intentional communities around the world that have shown that it's possible to produce, 40 or 50% of everything that's consumed. They've already demonstrated that it's also possible, this is the other 40, so if we could get somewhere closer to a 40% local production over the next several decades even, that would go very far towards resiliency. And then the second 40% is, well, how much do we actually use that we don't need, that's wasteful, right? So it's been demonstrated that of all of the water, of all of the energy, of all of the other resources that we use, including food, if we drop that by 40%, we use 40% less, it actually wouldn't impact our welfare or quality of life one iota. So there's a way of reordering the way that we consume all of these resources just in a smarter way, a more mindful way, a more efficient way, right? And so there's communities that have shown we can do this by 90%, I mean, I'm not suggesting that that's easy to do, but what I'm suggesting is even if you go part of the way there, you don't have to go to 90%, but if we could get to reducing all of our resource utilization by 40%, and we learned how to do that collectively, and we taught one another how to do that collectively, the next time a major stressor came in the form of a pandemic or a power outage, we would be so much better adapted, better equipped to handle those types of disruptions. So
agreed.
These are so many of the things that we're trying to build here in Boulder, and you sort of have to start somewhere, and you have to begin to see what the moving parts are and sort of identify the key components of that machinery and then begin to tweak it. But, the first one I think that's very exciting to me and I'm very passionate about is this idea of having a healthcare marketplace where all of the things that are truly deeply and intimately related to our health and well-being are there for everyone to see, and they're available on a monthly membership subscription model.
Beautiful.
So, yeah.
This is great. We know, living in Boulder, it's not all rosy as it sounds, like the devil's in the details in all of these endeavors, but the trajectory is clear. This is an inspiring reminder that when we get a shot across the bow like coronavirus pandemic, it reveals a lot of the opportunities of where we can continue on a good, true, and beautiful evolutionary trajectory to continue tightening things up and being more resilient, being more anti-fragile. And I think you're folding a lot of the dimensions here together with projects like Ravel. And so for someone that doesn't live in a place where there is direct primary care, does Ravel offer them a solution to either help their local medical system build in this direction or outsource it? Or how does that work for someone that wants to have more of this?
So Ravel is being built initially with two components. One is impeccably scalable. So that's the actual tech platform. That's how the thing
Brilliant.
runs. That's the marketplace. And that can be sort of transposed upon any community. If we can demonstrate a proof of concept here in Boulder, we can do something very similar in Minneapolis or San Jose or Albuquerque or wherever. But the heart of it, the actual goods and services, by definition, need to be local. So the practitioners of the healthcare services that are going to be integrated into the thing are obviously people that live here in Boulder. The farmers, the restaurateurs, the various other contributors will also be local, so that you could literally include as part of your monthly healthcare spend a membership to that CSA and get a certain amount of meat or a certain amount of vegetables delivered or eggs or whatever to your house, and just create that connection between, oh, this is part of my health practice. This is part of my healthcare program, my healthcare protocol. So it's both local as well as scalable.
Brilliant and great. And so that's Ravel, RAVEL.health, and people can get more information there. And any other ways people can track your work or other resources you want to recommend that listeners stay tuned in to this work?
Yeah, I think watching Ravel.health, we're going to continue to proceed down the launch of initially a beta test here in the near future, as well as a formal launch next summer.
Great.
So stay tuned there, and then to our blog page at cloudmedical.io.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, Dr. David Tusek, thank you so much for giving us all this extra time today. I feel like I was just getting in the way of your flow here. There's so much to integrate from this conversation. I think we're no doubt going to have to do a follow-up before too long to continue the conversation as it keeps rapidly evolving. Do you have the 10 Heartbreaks published anywhere? Can we repurpose that?
Yeah. They're on the cloudmedical.io blog.
Great.
As well as some information about this crazy, weird terminology that I seem to be interested in, resurrecting these dead words. So salutogenesis, again, the origins of health, and eudaimonics, which means value-based exchange, where both parties are elevated in their well-being together. So salutogenic eudaimonics, I think, provides us a really nice kind of template or architecture around how to get to that place, to the kind of world that our hearts know is possible, that we can build together.
Brilliant. Yeah. As far as eudaimonia is a word that I've been using in my practice for a long time. And I've always related to it as, it's as flourishing, as human flourishing. And it's kind of like, if there's a trajectory, that's it. So I love having this extra relationship and dimension to it. So anyway, well, thanks again. I hope people made good use of this. And if there's questions you have of too complex terms, definitely let us know and we'll follow up. Yeah, I can't express my gratitude more. And I look forward to more, David.
Thanks so much, Robert. Always great to talk to you.
Take care.
All right, buddy. Bye.